Face a brand new chart for the head and for the heart. It's your journey, your tools.
Welcome back. Today we are wading into some pretty heavy waters, but I promise you these are waters you have likely already been swimming in.
Probably without a life raft, too.
Yeah, exactly. Without a life raft and almost certainly without a map. We are taking the source material we've gathered and stripping away that polite veneer of, I'm fine and it's all good.
Right. We're going to talk about a very specific kind of devastation, the kind that happens entirely in the silence.
Because it is the silence that defines it. We are talking about grief that doesn't get a funeral, the reality of non-death losses.
And I think everyone listening right now has felt this at some point.
Oh, absolutely. It's that shattering feeling you get from a brutal breakup or maybe a sudden layoff where they literally walk you out of the building with a cardboard box.
Or a medical diagnosis that just permanently changes how you live your life.
Right. In that moment, you feel absolutely destroyed. Your world has stopped. But then there's this little voice in the back of your head, or maybe a very loud voice from your well-meaning friends.
Always the well-meaning friends.
Right? Saying, hey, pull it together. Nobody died.
And that voice is exactly what makes this topic so critical for us to unpack today.
Because we operate on this societal script that says grief is a very specific transaction.
Yes, it's transactional. If someone dies, you get a casserole, you get 3 days of bereavement leave, and you get universal sympathy.
But if you lose your career or an identity or a dream you had for your future, what do you get?
You get toxic positivity. You get told to look on the bright side.
At least you can get another job. At least you're young. At least you have your health.
Precisely. And our mission for this deep dive is to completely dismantle that script.
We are rejecting the stiff upper lip today. We're going to look at the concept of the assumptive world, which is the core beliefs we hold about our stability.
And what actually happens to the nervous system when that world is shattered.
Because the fascinating and, frankly, deeply validating thing we're going to uncover in the research today is that the human brain does not distinguish between the death of a person and the death of an identity.
It really doesn't. Biologically, it is the same alarm bell.
So if you are listening to this and you are hurting over something that isn't a funeral, we are here to tell you that you are not crazy for hurting this much.
Not at all.
We're going to look at the neurobiology of why heartbreak physically hurts. We're going to categorize these hidden sorrows and then give you a toolkit to actually rebuild. So let's jump in.
Let's do it.
I want to start with this idea from the sources of the assumptive world. It sounds like a lofty philosophy term, but reading through the notes, it feels incredibly practical.
It is the literal ground beneath your feet.
Right.
The assumptive world is a concept from trauma psychology. It is essentially the mental map you rely on to navigate existence on a daily basis.
So it's that set of core unprocessed beliefs like, I am safe.
Right. Or my partner loves me and is loyal. My career is stable because I work hard. I have a future that looks a certain way.
So these aren't just passing thoughts. They are the structural pillars of our reality.
They are the pillars. You don't wake up every morning and check to see if gravity is still working.
You just assume it is.
Exactly. In the same way you don't wake up and check if your identity is still valid. You assume it is.
But when a major life transition happens, like a betrayal or a chronic diagnosis,
Yeah.
it doesn't just change your daily schedule.
It detonates the map.
Right. It violates your fundamental assumption of how the entire world works.
So it's not just that I lost the job, it's that I lost the belief that the world is fair, or that hard work guarantees security.
And that is a catastrophic event for the human psyche.
Yeah.
It is a trauma.
But because there's no body to bury, society doesn't know what to do with you.
You're walking around with a shattered worldview, but you look exactly the same on the outside.
So everyone expects you to act the same.
Which brings us to our first major concept from the research. We need to define this landscape of hidden sorrow. We have to give names to these ghosts so we can actually see them.
Yes, taxonomy is important here.
And the first term we really need to get our heads around from the sources is disenfranchised grief.
This is a foundational concept. It was coined by Dr. Kenneth Doka back in 1989.
And it is honestly one of the most important frameworks for understanding modern mental health.
It really is. Disenfranchised grief is, simply put, grief that is not acknowledged by society.
It's grief that isn't socially sanctioned.
Meaning society has this rigid list of approved things to be sad about, and if your loss isn't on the list, you're basically out of luck.
So it is grief where the person is literally denied the right to grieve.
Exactly. And Doka breaks this down into 4 specific categories where this right is stripped away. I think walking through these is going to be a huge light bulb moment for you listening.
Because people are going to recognize their own ignored pain in these lists. Let's go through them. The first category in the research is unrecognized relationships.
Right. This is when the bond you had doesn't fit into the traditional immediate family box.
Like the death of an ex-spouse.
Oh, that's a massive one. People will look at you and say, well, you divorced him. Why are you crying? You didn't even like him.
Which completely misunderstands what grief is. Grief is not about liking someone. It is about attachment.
Exactly. You shared a life. Maybe you share children. You have a deeply wired history.
And when they die, that history is gone.
But society says, hey, you signed the divorce papers, so you essentially signed away your right to mourn.
Another one that hit home for me in the research was the concept of the work spouse.
Yes. The coworker relationship. You sit next to this person for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, for maybe 10 years.
You know, their coffee order, their marriage struggles, their kids' names.
You spend more waking hours with them than your actual family.
And then they get laid off. Or they take a new job across the country. Or they pass away.
And the company expects you to maybe sign a greeting card and get back to answering emails within the hour?
Because it's just a colleague.
Right. But biologically speaking, that was a primary attachment figure. Your nervous system relied on them.
And we definitely have to talk about the biggest one in this category, which is pets.
Absolutely.
I have friends who have been absolutely wrecked by losing a dog or a cat. And they feel so intensely guilty about it.
Because people say, well, it was just an animal. Go get another one from the shelter.
That is the pure essence of disenfranchisement right there. The relationship was real. The attachment was biological and chemical.
You're talking about oxytocin, dopamine, the whole suite of bonding hormones.
Yes, but the social validation is zero.
It also covers things like the death of an affair partner.
Oh, wow.
You can't go to the funeral. You can't post a tribute on social media. You are grieving entirely in the shadows.
That sounds incredibly isolating. You're carrying a boulder, and you can't even tell a single person you're holding it.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the second category Doka identifies?
Unrecognized losses. This is where the event itself isn't a death, so society deems it less worthy of grief.
This is the bucket that holds job loss, infertility, miscarriage, or the surrender of a child for adoption.
Miscarriage is a prime example of this. It's a massive, profound loss.
But often people don't even tell anyone it happened because of that unwritten 12-week rule, so they carry it completely alone.
It is a silent grief. You aren't just grieving a pregnancy, you are grieving an entire future. You are grieving the child you imagined holding.
And consider a diagnosis, like a traumatic brain injury or a chronic illness. You didn't die, but your health died.
Your ability to run marathons died. Your identity as the strong, capable one died.
But because you are still breathing, people expect you to just adapt immediately.
It's the at least you're alive trap. You should be grateful it wasn't worse.
Which is incredibly damaging.
Okay.
It denies the reality that a vital part of you actually did die.
Okay, third category. Unrecognized grievers.
This refers to people who society thinks are incapable of understanding loss right. People who just don't get it.
Yes, we see this so often with young children. Adults say, oh, they're resilient, they won't remember this.
Or the elderly. Or people with cognitive impairments.
We strip them of their agency. We assume that because they might not process the event intellectually like a neurotypical adult, they aren't feeling it emotionally.
So we exclude them from funerals. We don't talk to them about the reality of the situation.
And we just leave them confused and alone in their somatic feelings.
Which is, frankly, incredibly patronizing when you really think about it. And the fourth category.
Stigmatized circumstances. This is where the loss is completely wrapped in shame.
So suicide, overdose, incarceration.
Yes. If your partner goes to prison, you are grieving the loss of that person in your daily life. They are gone.
But you can't exactly go around the office looking for sympathy because of the heavy judgment attached to the crime.
Exactly. You become guilty by association. And the consequence of all of this, of all 4 of these categories, is the lack of what psychologists call communal witnessing.
Communal witnessing, meaning humans are social animals and we process pain by sharing it.
We need the tribe to look at us and say, I see that you are in pain and your pain matters.
When we are denied that,
Yeah.
when we are denied the right to mourn publicly, we internalize all that shame.
We start thinking, I must be weak, or I'm overreacting.
And the research shows that suppression leads directly to somatic illness. The body keeps the score.
It's like the pressure builds up with absolutely nowhere to go.
Now, there's another type of hidden loss in our stack of research today that is slightly different but equally heavy, and that is ambiguous loss.
Yes. This is Dr. Pauline Boss's pioneering work starting back in the 1970s.
If disenfranchised grief is about society saying you shouldn't care, ambiguous loss is about the situation being inherently confusing.
It's a loss without any possibility of closure. It's the paradox of here and gone.
Dr. Boss breaks this into two types as well, right? Let's look at type 1. Physical absence with psychological presence.
So they are physically gone, but they are entirely here in your head.
The classic historical examples of this are missing persons. Soldiers missing in action or kidnappings.
You don't know if they are dead or alive. There is no body to bury.
But in our modern everyday context, the sources point to ghosting.
Ghosting is the ultimate modern ambiguous loss.
Or a divorce where the person still lives in your town. Maybe you share custody.
They are physically absent from your home, but they take up massive psychological space.
You can't mourn them as dead, because they obviously aren't. They are just gone from your specific world.
You might see them at the grocery store, but they are a stranger. That is a cognitive dissonance that is just exhausting for the brain to maintain.
And type 2 is the exact reverse of that. Psychological absence with physical presence.
Correct. The body is sitting right there, but the person is gone.
This is dementia. This is Alzheimer's.
Traumatic brain injury.
And addiction. Addiction is a huge one here.
Yes, you're looking at your son or your spouse, and they physically look like the person you love, but the person you actually knew is completely inaccessible.
The lights are on, but no one is home. Or a totally different scary person is home.
And that is a profound, torturous kind of grief because it is continuous. Every single day is a brand new loss. You lose them a little bit more every day.
And this leads to what Dr. Boss calls the myth of closure.
Right.
Because I feel like closure is the holy grail everyone is always chasing. We watch movies where everything is neatly wrapped up in the third act. We say, I just need closure to move on.
And Dr. Boss would say you need to stop chasing it immediately.
Because in ambiguous loss, the brain essentially freezes in chronic ambivalence.
You are stuck between hope like maybe they'll come back or maybe the cure is right around the corner and grief, the reality that they are gone.
The expert insight from the source material here is that demanding closure is actually a cultural artifact.
It's a very Western obsession with mastery and fixing things. We want to solve the problem of pain like it's a math equation.
So we aren't actually supposed to fix it.
You can't fix ambiguity. You have to learn to live with the paradox. The goal isn't closure. It's tolerance for ambiguity.
Tolerance for ambiguity, being able to say this person is gone, AD, they are here.
It's learning to hold two completely opposing truths at once without your nervous system collapsing, finding meaning without finding a neat answer.
That is incredibly freeing, actually. Just giving up the fight for closure entirely. It takes so much pressure off.
It does.
But I want to pivot now, because we've talked about the psychology, the sociology, but the deep dive wouldn't be complete without getting into the hardware.
The neurobiology.
Yes. Because when I went through my biggest non-death loss, it was a career shift that just completely failed. I didn't just feel sad. I felt like I had the flu.
You felt physically beaten up.
My chest hurt. I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. And according to the research we're looking at, that wasn't in my head. Or, well, it was in my head, but in a very tangible, physical way.
It was very real. We have fMRI studies that are absolutely fascinating on this.
Scientists have put people in scanners and looked at what happens when they experience social rejection, or a bad breakup, or a massive loss of status.
And the brain lights up like a Christmas tree in very specific areas, specifically the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex.
The DACC.
Yes, the DACC and the anterior insula.
And for those of us listening who aren't neuroscientists, why do those two specific regions matter so much?
Because those are the exact same regions that light up when you break your leg or burn your hand on a stove.
So to the brain, the pain of I lost my job and the pain of I crushed my tibia are processed in the exact same neural real estate.
Exactly. The brain does not have a separate emotional pain center. It just piggybacked the new social software onto the existing physical pain hardware.
So when someone tells you, oh, it's all in your mind, they are technically right. But in your mind literally means in the physical pain centers of your brain.
Right. And we have to ask why. Why would evolution do that? Why make a breakup hurt like a broken bone?
I assume it's purely survival.
It is strictly survival. For early humans, social exile meant literal death.
We are not the fastest animals. We aren't the strongest.
We survive because we cooperate. If you were kicked out of the tribe, you starved, or you were eaten by a predator.
So the brain evolved to treat social disconnection as a life-threatening emergency.
It floods you with intense physical pain signals to say, hey, you are in immediate danger. Fix this social bond right now.
So that blind panic you feel when you get fired, that heart-racing, chest-tightening, cold sweat panic.
That's your primitive brain thinking you're about to be eaten by a tiger because you lost the safety of the tribe.
You are in a state of biological alarm. But it goes deeper than just pain. The sources talk about the Google Maps of the brain.
I love this analogy from the research. It perfectly explains how the brain maps our relationships.
Walk us through that.
So your brain is fundamentally a prediction machine. Its primary job is to predict what happens next so it can efficiently budget your metabolic energy.
When you have a partner or a steady job, your brain encodes that bond using oxytocin and dopamine.
It creates a literal virtual map where that person or that office building is a permanent fixture. It relies on them being there to function.
It says, okay, I wake up, my partner is in the kitchen, I drive to work, my desk is there.
Exactly like a saved location on your GPS.
And when the loss occurs, let's say the breakup happens today, that map is suddenly completely obsolete.
But the neural architecture hasn't updated yet. It takes time. The nucleus accumbens, which is the deep core of your reward system, keeps actively reaching out for the lost object.
It's reaching for the dopamine hit it usually gets.
It's reaching for the connection. It fully expects the partner to walk through the door at 6 p.m. It expects the direct deposit to hit the bank on Friday.
And when it doesn't happen, you experience a prediction error.
And more than that, you experience genuine neurochemical withdrawal.
So that intense yearning, that obsession where you literally can't stop checking their Instagram or you can't stop obsessing over your old office emails,
That is withdrawal.
the brain is stuck craving a reward that just no longer exists.
It's not you being obsessive or weak-willed. It is your dopamine circuits screaming for the fix they're habituated to. It is biological addiction to a person or a routine.
That makes so much sense. And it explains why it takes so long to get over it. You aren't just changing your mind, you are physically rewiring the map.
And you are rebuilding yourself. Which brings us to another region, the medial prefrontal cortex, or the MPFC.
This is the part of the brain that holds your self-schema right, your definition of who you are.
Yes, I am a husband, I am a dancer, I am a software engineer.
And the research shows that close relationships and core careers are woven directly into that neural definition.
So when you lose the job, you aren't just losing an income stream, you are undergoing a literal biological identity crisis.
The MPFC has to fire up and ask the terrifying question, if I am not that, then who am I?
And that is an exhausting question for the brain to answer. It is metabolically expensive. It consumes massive amounts of glucose.
Which is why grief makes you so incredibly tired.
Mm-hmm.
But there is one more layer to this neurobiology that the sources highlight, the default mode network, the DMN.
This is the part of the brain that handles prospection.
Prospection meaning daydreaming or imagining the future.
Exactly. The DMN is constantly running in the background, building scenarios about next week, next year, your retirement plans.
So when I get a medical diagnosis that says I can't run anymore, or I get served divorce papers,
The death of the future occurred.
a diagnosis doesn't just change your present day. It forces the default mode network to burn massive amounts of energy, actively dismantling years of imagined future scenarios.
You have to grieve the retirement trip you'll never take. You have to grieve the wedding you'll never have. That is a massive cognitive load.
It's like a computer crashing because it has to delete terabytes of data and rewrite the entire operating code from scratch.
That is a perfect analogy. You are offline for maintenance.
And while your brain is doing this exhausted, painful, biologically necessary work, what does society do?
Society tells you to cheer up and look on the bright side.
Right. Which leads us to the most toxic trap in this entire discussion, the comparative suffering trap.
This is a huge issue.
We are all guilty of this, at least Olympics.
At least you can get another job. At least you have your health. At least you aren't starving.
It is a reflex. But the deep dive here demands we understand why it is so profoundly damaging.
Comparative suffering operates on the fallacy that grief is a finite pie. Like if I take a slice of grief, there is somehow less compassion available for the starving children in the world.
But that's not how emotion works at all. Pain is pain.
Pain is entirely subjective to the organism experiencing it. Comparing your divorce to someone else's cancer doesn't magically make your divorce hurt less.
It just adds a layer of shame right on top of the pain.
It's the thief of compassion. It leads to self-gaslighting, where you start telling yourself, I really shouldn't feel this bad.
And when you tell yourself you shouldn't feel bad, you stop processing the feeling. You just stuff it down.
And that is where the physiological cost comes due. We have to be radically honest here. You cannot logic your way out of biological grief.
If you suppress the emotion because you think it's not big enough to count, your body stays in a constant state of high alert.
The sympathetic nervous system stays engaged. Fight or flight.
And the sources say suppression equals inflammation.
Yes, when you don't express the grief, your body keeps pumping cortisol. You get vasoconstriction, so your blood vessels literally tighten. Your blood pressure stays elevated. Your immune system crashes.
Which perfectly explains why after a big breakup or a major layoff, people always get sick, like physically sick with a bad cold or the flu.
Your antiviral defense system is completely compromised by the chronic stress of unexpressed grief.
But it can get even worse, right?
Yeah.
If the stress is chronic and you keep invalidating it and you get no communal support, your nervous system might decide that the threat is inescapable.
And that's when we hit the shutdown phase. Polyvagal theory, specifically Dr. Stephen Portis's work, calls this the dorsal vagal state.
This is the primitive freeze response. What does that actually look like in real life?
It looks like profound numbness, dissociation, brain fog, extreme lethargy. You literally cannot get off the couch. You don't care about anything.
Which looks exactly like clinical depression.
It mimics depression perfectly. But from a nervous system perspective, it is a protective collapse.
Your body has decided, I can't fight this threat and I can't run from it, so I am going to play dead.
And often this happens simply because we didn't allow the grief to be expressed in the first place. We shoved it down with toxic at least statements, and the body finally pulled the emergency brake.
Wow. So acknowledging the pain, saying out loud, this sucks and I am actively grieving, that is actually the physiological key to stopping that shutdown.
It is the only way out. Validation is the biological antidote to the freeze response. We have to start minimizing our pain. We have to stop desperately looking for the bright side immediately.
We have to just sit in the dark for a minute and say, yeah, it is really dark here.
Exactly.
Okay, so we need to validate. But the sources also make it clear we need new models. Because the old way of thinking about grief, the famous 5 stages, really doesn't work for non-death losses, does it?
It really doesn't. And we need to do some major myth busting here. Everyone knows the 5 stages. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Yes. But here's the historical context that almost everyone misses. Kubler-Ross developed that model by interviewing dying patients.
Right, it was a map for people who were facing their own impending death.
It was never intended to be a roadmap for the people left behind, the bereaved.
So society took a model designed for the dying and haphazardly applied it to the grieving.
Exactly. And we turned it into a rigid checklist. We think, okay, I did my anger phase, now I need to do some bargaining, and then I'll finally reach acceptance and be completely done.
And then I'll have closure.
Right. But real grief is not linear. It's chaotic and messy. You can feel intense anger and deep depression at the exact same moment. You can skip stages entirely.
And for non-death losses, like a chronic illness or maybe having a child with a severe disability, you don't just accept it and move on. The loss is ongoing every single day.
Applying a checklist to that is practically negligent.
So if the 5 stages are out, what is the better model? Because the source material spends a lot of time on Lois Tonkin, and I found this visual incredibly helpful.
This is arguably my favorite concept in modern grief work. It's called growing around grief.
Let's visualize this for everyone listening. The old view is that grief is a big dark ball inside a jar, and the jar represents your life.
And we mistakenly think that over time the dark ball shrinks. It gets smaller and smaller until it's just a tiny pebble you barely notice.
That's the classic time heals all wounds myth.
But Lois Tonkin says no. The ball absolutely does not shrink.
The grief of losing that career or that 20-year marriage stays the exact same size and the exact same intensity forever. It is permanent.
Which I know sounds deeply depressing at first.
That sounds terrifying.
But here's the crucial shift. The ball doesn't shrink, but the jar gets bigger.
Your life gets bigger.
Yes. You add new experiences to the jar. You meet new people. You find entirely new hobbies. You slowly build a new identity. Your life literally expands around the grief.
So the grief is still there inside the jar. If you reach in and touch it, it still burns just as much as day one.
But because your life is so much larger and more complex now, the grief doesn't take up the entire jar anymore.
Doesn't dominate every ounce of your existence.
Exactly. It validates that the loss was real and terrible, and that it still matters. We aren't trying to erase the past. We are trying to outgrow it. We are trying to become a larger container than the loss itself.
That is such a powerful paradigm shift. It stops you from feeling guilty that you're still crying over a job loss 5 years later. Of course, you're sad the ball is exactly the same size. You just have to focus on making the jar bigger.
Precisely, and that naturally brings us to the how. How do we practically make the jar bigger? How do we rebuild the identity when the MPFC is scrambling and the nervous system is shot?
This is the toolkit section of the deep dive. We have 4 specific actionable strategies from the research to help rebuild after a non-death loss.
And the first one goes right back to that neuroscience of the brain on fire. Strategy number 1 is name it to tame it.
This comes from Dr. Dan Siegel. We talked earlier about how we instinctively minimize our feelings. We say, oh, it's just a stressful week at work, or, man, that's a real bummer.
The fix here is to be radically explicit with your language. You need to forcefully label the feeling as grief.
You need to look in the mirror and say, I am grieving the loss of my identity as a manager. Or I am actively grieving the loss of my old friend group.
Why does that specific word matter so much? It's purely neurobiology. When you are overwhelmed, your amygdala, the brain's primitive alarm bell, is going crazy.
But when you explicitly label an emotion, you activate a region called the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex.
Yes, and that is the part of the brain that handles executive function and cool logic.
When you activate that area by speaking the emotion's true name, it sends immediate inhibitory signals down to the amygdala.
It physically quiets the biological alarm.
So saying I am grieving out loud literally calms your brain down chemically.
It does. It abruptly moves you from a state of chaotic emotional reactivity to a state of regulated mindful observation. You stop drowning in the feeling and you start observing it.
I love that. Name it to tame it. Okay, strategy number 2. This one addresses the fact that we don't have funerals for layoffs or breakups. We need a physical closure ritual.
Right. We talked about how the brain hates ambiguity. The nucleus accumbens is endlessly searching for the lost object. A physical ritual actively hacks the brain.
It gives you a tangible anchor for a completely intangible loss.
So how do we actually do this? It's not just haphazardly lighting a candle and taking a bath.
No, it needs to be highly structured. The research suggests a specific step-by-step process. First, select a physical object that symbolizes the specific loss.
Okay, so if it's a sudden job loss, maybe you take your old corporate ID badge or the physical key to the office.
Or if it's a difficult breakup, maybe a framed photo or a specific piece of jewelry they gave you.
It must be physical. Step 2 is writing the letter. But this isn't some polite corporate goodbye letter. This is a letter of both and.
Expressing both deep gratitude and intense anger.
Yes. You have to validate the bad stuff for the brain to process it. Write down the rage. Write down the unfairness and the bitter disappointment.
But also write down what you genuinely learned or what was good about it. This validates the complexity of the human experience.
And the absolute golden rule here is do not send the letter.
This is entirely for your nervous system, not for them.
Correct. Step 3 is transformation. You have to physically alter the object or the letter.
Burn the letter in a fire pit. Bury the key in the backyard. Take scissors and shred the ID badge into tiny pieces.
Why is the literal destruction so critical? Because the brain visually needs to see physical change to register a permanent ending?
Seeing the paper turn into ash gives the sensory motor network irrefutable proof that the event is actually over.
And then step 4 is the boundary. You verbally declare the transition.
You consciously tell yourself out loud the search is over.
This specific step helps stop that nucleus accumbens from constantly reaching out for the old reward. You are manually closing the road on the brain's Google map.
That is so deeply practical. I feel like anyone listening could set up that ritual this weekend. Okay, strategy number 3 from the sources. This is about rebuilding the who am I question, narrative therapy, and the tree of life.
This is a beautiful therapeutic exercise. When we lose a core identity, we feel like we are completely nothing. The tree of life helps us visually map out what actually remains intact.
You literally get a piece of paper and draw a tree. Walk us through the specific parts.
The roots are where you come from. Your personal history, your ancestry, your cultural background. That hasn't changed just because you lost your job. That foundation is incredibly stable.
Okay, so the roots are solid.
The trunk represents your inherent skills and core values. This is crucial for identity reconstruction.
You might not hold the title VP of Sales anymore, but the trunk still contains your leadership, your creativity, your complex problem solving.
Those are qualities of you as an organism, not the job title. They are still standing strong.
That's incredibly empowering. You kept all the underlying skills, you just lost the temporary title.
Exactly. Then you draw the branches. These are your new hopes and dreams.
This is where we actively re-engage the default mode network. We have to start consciously imagining new branches to replace the future ones that were violently cut off.
But there is a very specific part of this exercise that I found fascinating, and it relates directly to those toxic, at least, statements we covered.
The compost heap.
This is arguably the most vital part for non-death losses. In your drawing, you create a compost heap at the very bottom of the tree near the roots.
This is where you intentionally dump the toxic waste from society.
Yes. All those at least statements. At least you're young. You should really be over it by now. Real men don't cry. Everything happens for a reason.
You physically write those down and you stick them right in the compost heap.
And the brilliant metaphor here is that compost, which is basically just garbage and rotting organic matter, eventually breaks down and fertilizes the brand new growth.
So you use the anger from those comments, you use the sting of the rejection to actually fuel the new branches.
You don't ignore the toxicity, you repurpose it, you acknowledge that it really hurts, and you use that raw emotional energy to grow.
That is profound. Actively using the societal gaslighting as fertilizer.
Okay, final strategy. Strategy 4, possible selves.
This is about finally moving out of the liminal space. The liminal space is that terrifying hallway between doors. You left the old room, but you aren't in the new room yet. You're just floating.
It is deeply scary for the brain. So how do we move forward? We prototype.
We test out possible selves. You don't have to commit to a grand new life plan today. You just have to test a tiny low-stakes version of a future self.
Like trying on clothes in a dressing room. If you lost your identity as a lawyer and you suddenly think, well, maybe I want to be a professional baker.
You don't go out and take a loan to buy a bakery.
No, you take a single Saturday morning baking class. You prototype the new identity.
And this gives the brain a brand new target for dopamine. It shifts the neural focus from yearning for the past to genuine curiosity about the future.
It chemically switches the brain from painful withdrawal to active reward seeking. It breaks the freeze response paralysis.
This has been a massive amount of information, but in an incredibly grounding way.
Yeah.
I feel like we've taken something that is usually this vague, heavy, suffocating cloud and actually given it rigid structure.
That's always the goal of a deep dive. Understanding the biological mechanism is the absolute first step to actually healing it.
So let's recap the major takeaways from all these sources.
First and foremost, non-death loss is real grief. The brain treats it exactly like a severe physical wound. The DACC and insula are literally on fire. You are not making it up, and you are not being dramatic.
Second, beware the comparative suffering trap. Do not let anyone, including yourself, tell you that at least nobody died. That direct invalidation leads straight to dorsal nervous system shutdown.
Third, forget the outdated 5 stages of grief. Embrace Lois Tonkin's jar. The grief itself doesn't shrink, but your life will absolutely grow larger around it.
And finally, use the toolkit we just laid out. Name it to tame it. Perform a physical closure ritual with an object. Build your narrative tree of life. And prototype your possible future selves.
Absolutely.
I want to leave you listening with a final thought to mull over. We talked extensively about the compost heap in the Tree of Life exercise, and I want to challenge you right now.
That's a great challenge.
Think of one specific at least statement you've been carrying around with you. Maybe it's something your mom said to you years ago. Maybe it's something you actively tell yourself in the mirror every morning.
At least I have a roof over my head. At least I can always try again.
Take that specific statement, write it down on a mental piece of paper, and throw it directly onto the compost heap today.
Decide right now that it is no longer a law you have to live by.
It is just fertilizer for whatever you're going to grow next.
That is a brilliant and beautiful place to end the deep dive.
Thank you for going deep into the sources with us today. To everyone listening, your pain is entirely valid, your grief is biologically real, and you are completely allowed to feel it.
Take care of your nervous systems out there, everyone.
We'll see you in the next deep dive.
Your tools. It's the strength to build anew. It's the light to guide you through. It's the choice to find your way. Starting here, starting today.
That is the signal for this week. Remember, you do not have to wait for the grief to shrink, and you do not have to force yourself through some imaginary 5 stages. The goal is simply to build a life and a system that grows around it. Insight without action is just entertainment. If you are ready to do the work and start expanding your capacity, all the tools you need are waiting in the Your Journey, Your Tools app. Be kind to yourself, you are doing better than you think, and I'll catch you on your journey.